Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Ordinary Council meeting of the 17th of May 2022. I declare the meeting open at 6:01 p.m. and start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past and present. We do have some apologies this evening. Councillor Wallace is an apology. And I believe we're just waiting for Councillor Loden to join us online. We are running a hybrid meeting due to the current health issues. And we have Councillor Alexander joining us online. Is it possible, Wendy, to see Councillor Alexander and officers that are in attendance on the screen? That's very helpful in case they wish to put up their hand and speak. If anyone online at any time puts up your hand and you don't get a response from me, please feel free to just call out, because it might be that you're not visual at the time. So welcome all. We have one member of the public gallery this evening. Welcome, Andrew. You are brave. It is, I think increasing case numbers might be putting people off, but we have had some questions and notice as well. So I'll open public question time and please come forward.
Right. So I emailed all council members last week about some illegal paving of a verge on the properties on the corner of Leek and Clapperton Street. So I just wanted to provide a bit more detail. And I just wanted to say I'm not really asking for anything more than what council has already sort of demonstrated it wants in terms of through its greening strategy and its accessible city strategy, to have streets that have trees and are shady and are comfortable and enjoyable to walk on, and also that contribute to minimising the urban heat island effect. So given that you have these policies, I suppose the question I had is whether administration are aware of these policies, and if they are, have they chosen not to comply with these policies? Obviously, this owner didn't get approval, so I'm not sure where the officers are at with that. But I suppose just some more detail. So this property owner, my understanding, has only lived there for a few years. They've got a double garage, a double width crossover, which I suppose the council contributed to, given you got a policy on that. And they've got 50 metres of verge that they could have chosen to put this paving down. And I suppose I'm a bit disappointed that they chose a spot that there was only a couple of years ago, there was a street tree. And I suppose my view is if this paving is allowed to stay, what message does it send? I suppose it says that people thinking about themselves takes precedence over what might benefit a broader cross-section of the community. And I suppose also that the person didn't get approval. So obviously owners can do whatever they want on their own property, but I don't personally believe they should be able to do whatever they want on public land, particularly when it conflicts with council's own policies and strategies. And I suppose why should a decision of a property owner now have impact on residents that have lived there for decades, and for residents that will live there in the future? Basically, if that paving is allowed to stay, there'll never be a tree there. Unless they change, change owners, and there's no guarantee that the new owners would get rid of that paving. And just one last point on this is that I sort of take issue with the response I get from members of the administration about street trees, and that they basically say, look, if a property owner doesn't want a tree on their verge, then they're not going to put one there. And again, it comes back to this: it's not their land, it's community land, and sure, they might have a particular preference, but that shouldn't impact upon other members of the community and be in conflict with policies of the city. In a sense, it's sort of like, well, if I don't like a street tree on my verge, I can just go and cut it down because I don't like it. The outcome is the same. There's no street tree. So,
Andrew, you have reached 3 minutes.
Can I just say one more thing?
Sure.
Sorry, thank you, because there's no one else here. The long-term bicycle network, the Norfolk Safe Active Street is out for consultation at the moment, seeking feedback, which I thank the council for that. It doesn't look like the route of that safe active street is there's feedback's not being sought on the route. It's just like the treatments. Now, I hope people that I've spoken to, 90% do not support the current alignment. A route straight down Norfolk Street is much more preferable. And I know that when council adopted the long-term cycle network in August 2020, one of the resolutions was that that the council notes the network is aspirational, subject to change, and there's no obligation on the city to construct the routes contained in the plan. So I just hope that that route is open for consultation, because at the moment, it's not going to be that popular. So I just wanted to see your thoughts on, will that route be up for discussion?
Probably would have to get the project officer to give you a call about that.
Well,
because I'm not sure what the arrangement, Andrew,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the arrangement is with the Department of Transport and what the funding agreement stipulates, but we can find out and let you know.
I know the answer. I think council needs to intervene.
Thank you. Okay, we have also received questions on notice in writing. They have been distributed to council members, so taking those as read by council members this evening. We then move on to applications for leave of absence, and we have actually had an application for leave that hasn't featured in the agenda this evening. Executive Manager of Governance, do you have the dates available? You might just need to turn your microphone on when you get to it.
Through you, Cole, we did receive a request for leave of absence from Councillor Alexander between 28 May and 15 June, although remote or electronic participation is a possibility, which we'll be pursuing for those particular meetings.
In that circumstance, what's the procedure if we're able to do that via online? Has there been a clear preference?
We're expecting and hoping Councillor Alexander can participate online. We're not 100% sure if internet or 4G access will be available at particular times. It's only going to impact the council briefing and 2 workshops. It won't impact the June OCM.
Councillor Alexander, would you still like to receive leave for that period?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have a leave request from Councillor Alexander for the 28th of May to the 15th of June. Could I please have a mover and seconder? Move Councillor Hallett, seconded Councillor Castle. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Welcome to the meeting, Councillor Loden. And Councillor Alexander, you do need to vote on your own leave request. So voting in favour. Thank you.
Yeah.
Second leave request from Councillor Susan Gontaszewski for 2 distinct periods.
Thank you, Mayor. Those periods are the 7th to the 10th of June and the 15th to the 30th of June.
Okay, so we have 2 periods, the 7th to the 10th of June and the 15th to the 30th of June. Moved by Councillor Hallett, seconded by Councillor Castle. All those in favour? I declare that request carried. That takes us to receiving of petitions, deputations and presentations. We don't have any this evening, but when I go to announcements, I will talk to the petition that we received last month from residents of Fairfield Street. So next item of business, item 6, confirmation of minutes for the council meeting of the 5th of April 2022. Can I please have a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes? Moved by Councillor Castle, seconded by Councillor Opolo. All those in favour? Declare the minutes carried. Announcements by the presiding member. Just a few things to mention this evening. I would like to start by acknowledging today is Ida Hobbit Day, International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Interphobia and Transphobia. And as mentioned by a person on our Facebook page, also lesbophobia, which doesn't quite make it into the acronym, but I thought that was a fair call. So we're very proudly flying the pride flag as we do on Ida Hobbit Day and other days of significance to our LGBTQI+ community, and doing that proudly. Today is about acknowledging the importance of inclusivity and equity, and that there is ongoing discrimination against people of LGBTIQ+, and that this is something that we do need to bring to light and all challenge ourselves in this space. So always proud to support our diverse community in the City of Vincent. Also like to mention that we have 1 week left, or less than now. On Sunday at midnight, for those night owls, we will be closing our Imagine Vincent the Sequel survey. We'd like to encourage as many people as possible to provide feedback. This is our review of our 10-year strategic plan and an opportunity for community members to tell us what they think about Vincent in the future, what they think about it now, and just to generally share their thoughts with us. And it is nice to see there's been a lot of commentary coming through on underground power, and that's relevant to an item that we'll be dealing with this evening. Finally, just wanted to talk about the vexed issue of cars queuing on Fairfield Street, Mount Hawthorn, a residential street in our neighbourhood, where the cars have been queuing to access the Western Diagnostic Pathology for COVID testing. This has caused some chaos and concern for residents on the street in terms of entering and exiting their house, and the City of Vincent has been working closely with Western Diagnostic and their traffic management company to try to find a resolution, given that this is operating under a state planning exemption and we haven't had any enforcement powers. We've relied upon advocacy and seeking agreement with Western Diagnostic, as well as seeking some support from the Chief Health Officer. And this has been a combined effort from many of our officers in the City of Vincent, including health, rangers, assets and engineering in terms of traffic management plans. So I'd like to say thank you to all of the staff involved. I know the residents would have liked, and CEO who has gone off to meet with the head of Western Diagnostic. All guns were out in a nice and diplomatic way, as only our CEO knows how to do best. And we've managed to secure the agreement of Western Diagnostic to find a solution to take the traffic off Fairfield Street and to have a holding area for parking down near Britannia, so that cars will no longer be queuing on Fairfield Street. So this is an item that came to Council as a petition, and we are expecting a report back to Council. The resolution just came in today, so we haven't had an opportunity to have that presented back to Council, but we do have an outcome, and that will be in place from Monday. I think some of the residents are concerned that this may not work, but now that we have a traffic management plan in place, my understanding is that that traffic management plan can then be enforced by the City of Vincent. So it is actually a bona fide new traffic management plan in existence. So that's good news. So moving to declarations of interest. CEO, is that you or Executive Manager?
Thank you, Chair. That will be me. Councillors, we have the following declarations of interests. Councillor Jonathan Hallett, Councillor Suzanne Warner, Councillor Ron Alexander, and Councillor Ashley Wallace, who happens to be an apology this evening, declared a proximity interest in the item 12.8 Vincent Underground Power Project. The extent of their interest is that their property or their partner's property is within the project zone. This is an interest in common with a significant number of ratepayers, covering an estimated 5,336 electricity service meters to properties in the City of Vincent. The report identifies that underground power may provide an estimated increase in property value of approximately $12,000 per residential property. In respect to those declarations of interest, the councillors through the city sought ministerial permission under section 5.693B of the Local Government Act to be able to participate in the decision making of this particular item. And advice was received this week from the Executive Director, Local Government, that approval has been given for the city's application for those councillors to participate in that item. And specifically, this approval allows Councillor Wallace, Councillor Hallett, Councillor Warner and Councillor Alexander to fully participate in the discussion and decision-making relating to the item to be discussed at the city's ordinary council meeting to be held tonight. There are some conditions which the city will meet in respect to that.
Manager, do we need to outline the conditions or will that form part of the minutes?
It will form part of the minutes.
Okay, as long as the councillors are aware of what those conditions are.
The letter of approval has been passed on to all councillors, so they're aware of those conditions.
Is everyone satisfied or are there any questions? Okay.
Through you, Mayor Cole,
Yes,
could I
Theo?
just comment in terms of our liaison with the department on the application? They were very clear that the approval only relates to this meeting. So every other meeting subsequent to this involving those proximate interests, we would have to reconsider or reapply for a similar approval. And the nature of the item might change, particularly when we start considering some of the financial aspects of the underground power program.
Thank you, CEO. Do you, so we know we don't need to vote on that because that's been dealt with by the department.
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Further interests have been declared. David McLennan, CEO, declared an impartiality interest in item 17.1, appointment of the design review panel. The extent of his interest is that he knows one of the applicants through his involvement in the AUDRC, including through his position as AUDRC chair. He was not involved in the assessment process for the DRP applicants. Mayor Emma Cole declared an impartiality interest in the same item 17.1, appointment of the design review panel. The extent of her interest is that she is a personal acquaintance of one of the nominees. And also Councillor Susan Gontachevsky declared an interest in item 11.5, advertising of a new policy, sports ground allocation, use and hire policy. That item has since been withdrawn by administration and will no longer be considered at this meeting. They are the declarations that I have to hand.
Thank you very much, Executive Manager. So we'll just go around council members to see which items you might wish to pull out for debate, noting that none of the items have been that were raised this evening are on the council agenda, but we do have an absolute majority decision at item 9.4, so that will be called out. We do have an absolute majority decision 12.1, 12.3 and 12.6. So in addition to those items, I'll just start with you, Councillor Hallett. Any other items to discuss?
Just 9.1.
Thank you. Councillor Castle, Councillor Opolo.
12.7. 12.7.
12.7. Thank you. Councillor Alexander. You're just on mute, Councillor Alexander.
Sorry. 9.4 Sydney Street.
Thank you. Councillor Warner, Councillor Loden, Councillor Gontachevsky. Okay. You have one? You have one. You're not a council member.
I know. Sorry, Mayor. I did notice in one of the questions to council that were tabled this evening included a query about the recommendation for the item 12.10 report minutes of the audit committee meeting held on the 3rd of May. I understand that the recommendation in there suggests noting the recommendations in there. It should be endorses or approves the recommendations in there. So I'd like to get that amendment fixed for that item, if I could, please.
Thank you. And in any case, we do need to pull that one out. So thank you. That was very useful. All right. So, and in relation to item 17.1, appointment of the design review panel, does any council members wish to pull that out for discussion, or are you happy for that also to be moved on block? Okay, we'll treat that one as on block. Okay, if you can just bear with me, we'll just go through the items that will be moved on block.
Thank you, Mayor. The items to be passed on block are the following: 9.2, 9.3, 10.1, 10.2, 11.1, 11.2, 11.3, 11.4, 11.6, 12.2, 12.4, 12.5, 12.8, 12.9, and 12.11 and 17.1.
Can I please have a mover and seconder for the on block items? Move Councillor Warner, seconded Councillor Loden. All those in favour? I declare the on block items carried. I do just want to mention that we have just moved and endorsed the Western Power MOU. That is incredibly exciting news for the City of Vincent. I'm surprised it didn't get called out, but we will be doing a lot of communications about that. I just wanted to mention that because I'm not sure whether we have any community members listening in on that one. So just to confirm, that has been endorsed, and we will be communicating about that as soon as tomorrow, because there has been a lot of community interest in that. So there will be communications on our Facebook page tomorrow with some more detail and publication of the plans. They have been available in the report, but I'm trying to get them converted to a JPEG so we can actually get them up easily for people to see that, because I think there's a lot of interest, and it has been discussed quite a lot on some of our community Facebook pages. So we're ready to run with that tomorrow morning. All right, so first item called forward for debate is item 9.1, which is 596 to 598 Newcastle Street, West Perth, proposed amendment to previous approval, billboard signs, unlisted use. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Hallett, seconded by Councillor Iapolo.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I just pulled this out because I thought there was a fair bit of discussion last week, and just worth us, I guess, emphasising what the policy landscape is for this particular one. I personally am quite sympathetic to the applicant because there has been challenges in the past around access, and there are constraints. But I think we also have a very clear established position as a council around third-party billboards, and I guess the number of temporary approvals may lead to the sense that could go on forever, but the intention of temporary approvals is specifically so that there was opportunity and incentive to pursue alternatives for the site. So I just wanted to flag that, and I support the officer's recommendation as is. And whilst the lot is taken care of very well by the owner, it would be a lost opportunity for the broader community and the leadable area not to have that site developed at some point to match the intent of the area.
Councillor Iapolo.
Thank you, Mayor. The voice is going a little bit, so I'll try and make it as clear as I can. This is a curious case, and I share the concern in the room that this is the applicant's request seems reasonable enough to at least be worthy of serious consideration. For the following reasons: the billboard signs have existed at this location since 2004 and are currently approved until October 2029. So these approvals have effectively been here on this subject site for 25 years. There's been no complaints received regarding the billboard signs, and the applicant has maintained the site immaculately through the period. DPLH, Department of Land and Heritage, has no objection to permanent signage. The main road's initial objection has been withdrawn. The city's local planning strategy, as disclosed by administration, the briefing notes, does not identify the subject site as a strategic development site. And the subject site has development challenges because of the access issues. And while the applicant would have or should have known that at the time of purchase, buyer beware, I don't think that there is anything untoward with the request to provide some revenue certainty until the applicant decides if and when to develop. My understanding is the main reason why administration is recommending to deny the applicant's request is that the current use does not comply to the city's policy 7.52 pertaining to signs and advertising. That's a plausible reason, and I don't want to brush that under the carpet, but I guess what I have difficulty reconciling is the fact that council's previous decisions to make exception to this policy, and that has been effectively for a 25-year period. So I guess on that basis and the reasons mentioned, I kind of do have sympathy with the applicant, that there does appear not to be any beneficial planning purpose served to not approve the request. It seems like if the council has been willing to overlook or make exception to the policy for such a long period, 25 years, perhaps the policy needs revision. The only caveat I have with the sympathy for the applicant is the word perpetuity rather than indefinitely, because if there is a change in zoning in the future from commercial to another zoning, the future use of the property would need to comply with that subsequent zoning. So subject to obviously the collective view of the council, I'm more inclined to support the applicant's request, but subject to administration's opinion as to whether the word perpetuity or indefinitely is more preferable in those circumstances. So my only question is, does perpetuity to itself indicate that even if there was zoning change, that we are giving something that is irreversible, even if in the future someone says there has to be a park and reserve, for example, and is indefinitely a better word?
Just checking who's available from Strategy and Development this evening. Oh, hello, Mitchell.
Hello, Michael. 3 year, the planning approval would run with the land. So irrespective of whether the wording was in perpetuity or indefinitely, that approval would still sit in place. And irrespective of the change in the zoning or anything that may change in the scheme.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alexander, you wish to speak?
I do. Look, I've chatted with Mr. Serini, and I think as people, or most people, are aware that he's sort of stuck with this property and doesn't have many alternatives. And is it possible for the City of Vincent to work with him to look at what alternatives he has to actually realise some value for the land? Because everywhere he looks, you can't connect up with the neighbours. There's all sorts of things that stop him, and Main Roads and others have withdrawn any objections that they have. And the site is not unseemly, and we're just saying no without offering anything else on what he can use it for. So I've got two comments. One, is there some way the City of Vincent could work with him to come up with some viable solution to development? Because just saying no doesn't help anyone. And I don't have any problem with the billboard signs being up there myself.
Councillor Loden.
Just a query in terms of, I understand the policy was changed relatively recently, and I just was wondering if we had details of exactly when the policy change occurred that made that prohibited the use of billboards, and when that aligned with the last time the council considered this item.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the signs policy, when it first was approved by council in 2001, contained the provision which prohibits billboard signage throughout the city. So that has been in effect since the approval in 2004 for the subject billboards.
So from my perspective, I look at this is a planning application, so we consider it on state planning law and on council policy. And to me, in that position, the policy is very clear. I was here, I don't think I was here when this one was last considered, but I think I was here for a similar one at that time. And that time we did allow a short extension for the billboard, but on that express provision that the intent was for it to disappear by the next time. I see that there's no difference in this circumstance. I don't see that this should be something that is considered in perpetuity. So in that case, I support the officer recommendation to refuse.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, look, I'm supportive of the officer recommendation. I too was here. We've seen a couple of billboard applications that come in every now and again. We have a small number that have been approved in the city as exemptions to the policy, and they have all been in the situation where there are limited other options for those parcels of land, including this one. I don't actually see this refusal as saying no to the applicant, because we have said yes for 10 years, for a 10-year extension at the time. So there's certainly still considerable amount of time for the applicant to explore other options. I believe the advice I received from administration last week was that changes to the LPS2 have made the site potentially more developable. And that situation is precisely the reason why we don't grant applications for these in perpetuity, because we are seeking the outcome that they can be developed in the future when circumstances change. I also think that it's very important that we are consistent in our decision making. We have had a very clear position for some time, since 2001, about refusals of billboards, except in very exceptional circumstances. And I don't see a reason to vary that now, particularly when there may well be potential for a resolution on this site. So I'm supportive of the refusal.
Councillor Warner.
Thank you, Mayor. I feel like I'm sort of repeating what everyone else is almost saying, but I do want to commend Mr. Sereni on keeping the plot of land so well maintained, because as far as places with billboards go, this is one of the best looking ones I've ever seen. But in saying that, it is contrary to what he's requesting is in contrary to our policy, and I really can't see how we can really work around that. This is this permanent installation in perpetuity is not what our policy is looking for. So I do support the officer's recommendations, and I do hope that there is development opportunities that do arise for this block, because it's a great location. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Yeah, look, agree with the councillors that are supportive of the officer's recommendation. I think it is clear that this the current approval is valid until the 21st of October 2029. It does give a lot of time for potentially things to change in the surrounding, I guess, private sphere, but also it doesn't mean that if this decision tonight isn't necessarily denying someone an income tomorrow. So the decision or the recommendation from administration is in alignment with the current policy. The policy has recently been reviewed and is out for advertising, and my understanding is that the commentary from community is still very supportive of the policy position against third-party billboard advertising or third-party advertising. So I think the thing is that this is the long-standing policy. Its review has confirmed community support for the policy position, and that there is ultimately, as Councillor Loden has said, we have to consider these applications in accordance with quasi-judicial role in terms of planning, and we are not able to consider, I guess, that sort of commercial return element from as part of that decision-making space. So yes, I'm supportive of the officer recommendation tonight.
Thank you. Look, just to speak to it, because I've sat through mediation processes on billboards. This has been a position of the City of Vincent to have no new billboards unless they're under limited approval periods where sites have had issues and they've been waiting to sort of get to a point where they can develop. This is a position that's been maintained very strongly by the City of Vincent throughout the history of the City of Vincent. At the time that the City of Vincent separated from the City of Perth, the existing billboards that were in existence under City of Perth were specifically listed within our scheme to have approval in perpetuity, and anything else since has been approved on a time-limited basis. We, as not to sort of repeat, but I think it is important to state that we have only just very recently, mid to 2021, gone back out to the community to retest this with our community to see if the support still lies with the city's position in relation to not having third-party billboard advertising, given that we were starting to receive some more applications, including digital billboards, and the community support showed 74% in favour of us maintaining that long-held position. This existing billboard still has a long way to go till 2028. And what we're looking at with the new policy and the amendment to the LPS 2, which is coming from that, is to actually discontinue billboards and time-limited approvals after 2024. So we've actually moved to a more solid position on third-party billboards following that period of community consultation, which is basically to come to an end of this rolling approvals and to actually say by 2024, any rolling approvals will no longer be approved thereafter. Of course, this one lasts through to 2028 and they have that approval in place and that will not be altered and cannot be altered. But the position has only strengthened based on that most recent community consultation. On the basis of an orderly and proper planning approach, it would really be remiss of us to take a departure from our local planning policy and more recent decisions that we've made on billboards, which have gone through to SAT mediation, and where we've been fortunate, but that both applicants have opted to withdraw, understanding that our position has been very solid. Yes.
So my question is, given obviously that everyone believes our policies are important, which I totally agree with, what was the grounds by which council approved it for 10 years last time, given that the policy was in place?
So, look, I guess I'm happy to answer that. The decision was made at the time because we hadn't gone back out to the community with the review. It was similar to looking at the site constraints and then looking at a sort of a horizon where development might be possible, potential development without providing car parking, for example. But since that time, the policy has been re-advertised. We started receiving more applications, including digital billboards. And the community came back and said, we support the position, and we have reflected on that and set a deadline of 2024.
Okay, and all that happened after, even though the policy was in place. So it's not that the policy's changed. The policy has always been there since 2001. It's that, and whatever the reasons why the past decisions were to allow an exception to the policy, well, I think the justification, what you're saying is that there was more community consultation done in 2021, which confirmed the community's view that the policy was the right one. And therefore, there's been a change in view that it's unlikely that we'd want to make any exception to the policy. Is that effectively the rationale?
I think that's a pretty good summary.
Yeah.
Okay, is that do you wish to speak again, Mover? I think everyone's spoken. Okay, I'll put the vote. All those in favour of the officer recommendation? All those against? Councillor Arpolo and Councillor Alexander voting against. I declare the motion carried. Okay, moving to item 9.4, sale of 25 Sydney Street, North Perth. Can I have a mover and seconder for this item, please? Moved by Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded by Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I am supportive of the officer recommendation. I'm trying to think of how to craft it. I will let the seconder speak in relation to trying to figure out if I have to ask questions around the confidential attachment or if we end up in there. Ultimately, I am supportive of this process in terms of progressing with our transition plan for Sydney Street and the Sydney Haynes Reserve, which has been a long-standing commitment we've had with the community, and I'm pleased to see this being part of us moving in that direction, albeit, potentially a little slower than I would have liked, but I'm pleased to see this item come forward tonight. But I probably have a question later.
Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm supportive of the officer recommendation. I do appreciate the changes that were made in this week, although slightly disappointed I didn't get to move an amendment, but I'll deal with that. I did have one question on the recommendation. It refers to attachment, I think it's attachment 2, in terms of the valuation, but there isn't an attachment 2 in the report. There is an attachment in the confidential section, which refers to evaluation, but that's not attachment 2. But that appears to be the original evaluation. So there was discussion about getting a new valuation. I might have missed it somewhere, but I haven't seen that revaluation. Is that somewhere, or are we using the original valuation?
Through the chair, a new valuation was obtained, and that would have been distributed. I'll make sure that it comes back through. That was the initial valuation that we actually received, was just the figures in respect to R10 and R3040. Sorry, thank you. R20 and R3040. Thank you, Matt. And just the figure itself was included because of the urgency of getting the evaluation. We were waiting for the report to come through, and that hasn't been received as yet.
Yeah.
But the overall figures were received.
Sorry, and so in terms of those, the number that we're using is the updated valuation number for the R3040 valuation, or the R20 valuation?
Through the chair, valuations received between the two were more than that which was in the past valuation, and there was, I could probably say, only a 40,000 differential between the lower density versus the higher density. And given the nature of the development along that street face, administration is recommending that it remain at the lower density.
Thank you for clarifying, and apologies for missing that in the notes there. I do support that proposal as well. I do know that there's a discussion around what is an appropriate use of these funds as well. From my point of view, this has been a long process to get to achieving this public open space outcome, but we still need significant funds to actually achieve the public open space in this location, to clear the site and so forth. Those funds need to come from somewhere, and this little parcel of land, which is kind of in some ways a bolt-on to the existing space. If you lose that, you don't significantly detract from the overall public open space. It still achieves the public open space outcome that we're seeking, and it is a useful way to fund this activity and a critical part of our public open space strategy, which we've had extensive consultation and engagement with the community from. So I see this as a really strong pathway forward to achieving this outcome. If we don't take this step, then we're basically without a way to to achieve the public open space in this location that a lot of the community has supported over the extensive consultation that we've had to get to this point, and the significant hurdle of removing the 3 tenants from this site, which was not an easy process, as Mayor Cole will no doubt attest to. So taking this next step just seems like the not logical next step for us to do to make this all work.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm also supportive of the administration's recommendation as it reads. I do wish to propose a small amendment following on from Councillor Loden's question, just to make clause 2.3 clear, because there are 2 market valuations on attachment 2. So if that's okay, I'd like to propose an amendment.
Go ahead.
In clause 2.3 to add the words after market valuation, add the words in scenario 1 included at attachment 2.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Gonchevsky. Administration, is that clarifying for you?
Through the chair, that's acceptable.
Okay. Any debate on the amendment? I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Are you voting against, Councillor Alexander? You're voting with, in favour?
Not voting in favour.
Oh, you're not? Okay, okay. I'll do that again. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Alexander voting against. We're back to the substantive motion.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, on the point, so yes, as I've said, I'm supportive of the recommendation, and in relation to where those funds will go, I am grateful for the clarification this week around those funds being directed to the Public Open Space Reserve. I think, having been on council when this very difficult process was entered into, I sincerely believe that that was part of the deal that we struck with the community when making this particular arrangement. We had a very difficult process to revert this piece of land to what it was intended to be, which is for recreational purposes, pursuant to the deed of trust. And I think it's important that we honour the agreement that we made with the community and keep the faith of that process, and that included using the proceeds of this land, the sale of this land, for the development of that public open space reserve. It is something that our community has told us many times, not just in this area, but all across the city, how precious that is. And we know that it's not something that comes cheap. So I'm certainly in favour of earmarking it for the development of this reserve.
Councillor Warner.
Thank you, Councillor Alex Castle. I just wanted to agree and say I also support the officer recommendation. I've also, being a new councillor, I didn't have the historical context of what had happened with this whole Haynes Street Reserve. So I've been investigating that, and to have that context actually makes me even more determined to agree that we've made a commitment here, and this is the way that we can actually follow through on it, instead of having another promise that's out there for us to try to find a way to work it out. This is a way that we can hopefully resolve this entire situation and move on to the next thing and provide something more for the community.
Councillors, Councillor Opolo.
Yep, I'm supportive of the recommendation to dispose of the property, but I guess the importance of where the funds go is kind of washing over my head, because whether, and I know there's a motion, a proposed amendment that might be tabled, but all the funds are in one bucket. I mean, whether we historically have done something in the past which supported public open space and we finance that with debt, and then we sell this property, and whether we sell back the debt or put it into this reserve or in general funds, I don't really understand the significance of it. So my question to administration is, what is the significance? Because funding comes from all sources, whether it's from rates or from debt. So why is it so important with this particular property that the proceeds be transferred or made available in a reserve for public open space when we would have done that in the past and just perhaps rack up debt? So that's my question. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the main basis for that recommendation is Council's public open space strategy, which does have a specific task about investigating the sale of underperforming and or surplus city-owned land or facilities. We certainly consider this car park site to be surplus to our requirements. The following task in the strategy is reads, specifically ring fence any land disposal proceeds from the for the purposes of the Public Open Space Reserve Fund. So that's the basis for Council's or administration's recommendation in that regard. But I do agree with the broader point from Councillor Iopolo that how and when Council adjusts its reserve balances, money coming in and money coming out, that can be made as part of routine budget preparation processes.
Councillors, I'll speak to this motion because it does bring back many memories for me. This is something that the CEO and I actually presented on at a WELGA forum where we talked about highly complex issues and problem solving, because we actually did have a really complex situation on our hands, and it went back to the fact that historically we had a park, half of which is actually under a deed of trust for the use of recreational purposes, and the rest is a park. At some point when Kyla needed a kindy, they decided to build the kindergarten on the park, on the part that has the deed over it. It's about 50% of the park. That then became a kindergarten. An educational use on a park, still a little bit questionable about whether that meets parks and recreation and the terms of the deed. But over time, Kyla Kids Galore were offering after school care. The kindergarten managed to move back to the school to be homed with the primary school, and Kids Galore actually took out a commercial lease with the City of Vincent, previous council, previous time at the City of Vincent, which effectively was in breach of the deed of trust over the land. We have actually come to an arrangement, not just with our community, but with the Attorney General, about how we transition this land back from having built form on it to a park. And that has included some pretty significant leasing negotiations with dental surgery, which has been difficult, and they've had to do a relocation plan, and we've had them come and address us in the chamber about the complexities around that, and a proprietary limited childcare centre, which is deeply popular and incredibly well used by members of our community. So we've been through this incredibly complex process where we are trying to deliver this land back to its original use as parks and recreation. It's identified within our public open space strategy as an area in Vincent lacking in public open space. And we do need to do this because it is now part of a agreement that we have with the State Attorney General and with the leaseholders on the land and our community. So it is imperative that we do that. We do have on the draft budget some $360,000 towards the first part of this project, which is to deal with half of the park in the transitional arrangement, again signed off by the Attorney General, that we do this over a period of time, and that money would then potentially, if we sell the land, that money allocated on the draft budget could then be replaced by the assets, the proceeds of the land sale. So that makes sense, because then that $360,000 can go towards debt or go towards reduction in rate setting or go towards whatever we want to do with that money that's up for discussion. So look, I won't discuss the amendment because it hasn't been put, but that's just a little bit of history of this complex process that we went through. And there is much excitement in the community about winning back that Parks and Rec space. And we did have that undertaking that we would do that to various parties. So fully support the officer recommendation. And I do think in terms of sale of the land, where we have tried to sell land, we have come unstuck. It's been extremely difficult and contentious, and it's really important for our community to understand where the proceeds of sale will go. I think this is probably one of the cleanest and straightforward proposals for sale that we have been able to put to the community, because we can say this car park, the proceeds of sale will go directly towards doing the Haynes Street Reserve development plan, which we've approved as a council and consulted on with our community, so that they can see the direct benefit of the sale going back into the park immediately opposite. Our public open space strategy also has talked about the fact that when we do sell land, we should earmark that for public open space. And that's something that I think is an important thing that we do as well, so that when we're selling land, we say to our community, any land sale will result in either more public open space or improvement to existing public open space, and to have that need and nexus. We've established the need in our public open space strategy, and I think it's important for our community to see that nexus between land sales and improvement to our public open space position. Any further comments? Councillor Alexander, do you wish to move your amendment?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
And then speak to it, I guess. So,
well,
look,
if you can just, before you speak to it, if you can just move it, and then I'll see if we have a seconder.
All right. Recommendation 3 be amended as follows. Authorise that proceeds from the sale of the land be applied towards the repayment of borrowings as itemised in note 6A of the annual budget for the year ended 30th of June 2022.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Arpolo. Go ahead, Councillor Alexander, so you can speak to it now.
Okay, look, just a couple of things. I think, the councils, in my view, have got to have some rigour in ensuring that the debt that the City of Vincent has is wound back a bit. And you could argue that the POS is a discretionary project, and, I believe we need to reduce the city ratepayers' debt levels before we engage in discretionary projects. Now, sometimes I think some of the engagements with community are a little bit dubious, and I'm a world's expert on proximity of interest at the moment. So we go and ask people in the proximity of some of these areas that are going to get public open space, that I think it's a good idea, and they do, of course. And when people buy their houses, they buy them in areas that have public open space, don't have public open space. But if you buy one in an area where there's no public space, and along comes the council and they're going to spend money to put public space in your area, the value of your house is likely to go up. So there's some interesting other asides to public open space, which I'm not sure people have considered. But my main concern at the moment is, given that the City of Vincent is in a budgetary phrase, that the council has to have some rigour in this exercise. And I understand people's commitment to public open space and all the reasons as why it is good. I also note that administration's comment was supported in part, which was, the administration would support council allocating a portion of 25 Sydney Street sale proceeds to the reserves and or early repayment of debt. For instance, 50% any surplus sale proceeds could be allocated to reserves and 50% allocated to early repayment of debt. Both decisions would improve the city's financial position. And I'm just, I guess, saying to councillors and others that the situation that the city's in has to have, and I believe people involved need to have some real rigour in determining where money goes. And every discretionary item that comes along is something that we would all love to have. But nevertheless, the city's in a position where, it can't afford some of these things, and it's got to consider that. So I've heard what everyone else has had to say, and I understand why they're saying those sorts of things, but I'm just recommending to the council that there has to be some rigour in these exercises to wind the City of Vincent's debt back. So that's my position.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Councillor Opolo.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I would have been quite happy to have voted in favour of what was already on the table. However, I understand the history that's been spoken about tonight, but I do, you know, as Councillor Alexander was talking, it does raise some important points that, you know, we are at the point where City of Vincent has maximised its debt capability, and, you know, there's no plan in place at the moment to really aggressively tackle the reduction in debt. So, you know, I think Councillor Alexander is making a good point, and I'd probably, from a financial position, I probably would support what Councillor Alexander is saying on this occasion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. From my point of view, I totally agree with the intent around reducing debt. But I guess from a historical point of view, the reason why this debt exists is because of decision-making in the past that lacked rigour. We decided to do upgrades of facilities, including this council building that we're in, the Loftus Centre next door, BD Park, and so forth. And that decision-making took on debt without appropriate capacity to repay that debt. So at that time, the decision-making there was not having the rigour to either increase rates to then afford to pay back that debt over a 25-year period. Those were done as interest-only loans, or make the appropriate savings in the budget process so that you did not need to increase rates. Now, that's a legacy that we're stuck with here. But from my point of view, we have very, very limited fixed assets that do not depreciate in the City of Vincent. The only assets we have that don't depreciate is our land. So if we're selling our land, we should not be selling it because of past decision-making that didn't appropriately either cut budgets or increase rates. We're still going to have to deal with that in the future, but what we need to be doing is basically addressing those issues through either cost savings or through increasing rates, and have that conversation, explain to our community why those rates are going up because of either an increase in service level or otherwise. So if the proposal is to sell land to reduce the city's debt, I don't support that. I'd much prefer to see us do that through either cost savings or rate rises in the dollar. Thank you.
Councillors, Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Look, I can appreciate that this could be considered to be discretionary spending, but I think ultimately that we have a firm commitment to the community to deliver on this project. We have plans to deliver on this project now. You know, like, this is live, this is happening. We're going to, we have been working on a transition plan. That transition plan is in train, and it's important that we can see it through to the end. We also have a number of other firm commitments to our community in relation to open space that have not been met. So in terms of rigour, I think that, and budget setting, I personally think that, you know, I try and take a fairly rigorous approach to budgeting and look at the external factors that we have to consider here at the City of Vincent, but I go through line by line. I ask pointed and meaningful questions of administration, and I look for savings where they can be found. And I absolutely think that it is something that we need to address at the City of Vincent as to where we sit in relation to our rate base. We need to acknowledge the challenges that we face in terms of gathering enough from our rates. And we also need to acknowledge where we're at in terms of our debt. So I think that it's absolutely reasonable we consider this amendment tonight, but I'm not supportive of it. I want to keep my commitment to the community. I think the other thing is that I do take Councillor Aupolo's point of view in relation to, you know, whether something is funded through a reserve or whether it's funded through debt. You know, those are all discussions you can have at the time. However, I would say that when we fund things through debt now, it's either where we have a positive business case that supports financing something through debt in terms of it essentially paying for itself, like if we look at our solar panel installation, or where we have something effectively fall out of the sky and we have to finance it that way, and we're not financing it through reserves. One of the reasons we potentially have to look to debt rather than reserves is because we don't have sufficient reserves to deliver on the promises we've made to our community. And I think that we need to rectify that. We've made promises to the community in relation to public open space. We've got a public open space strategy that talks to land sales and where the funds should go. And I'm absolutely all in for the consideration of our budget and how we can find savings, and for discussions with the community going forward about how we fund our activities. But this amendment tonight is not something I can support.
Councillors? Look, just some comments from me. It is important that when we set a path that involves community and the State Attorney General and an agreement on a transition plan that's been met, that we follow that through. I have already spoken about the fact that on the draft budget, there is $360,000 sitting against this project, which would then be freed up to address debt or to address reserves or to address rate setting, all of those things. That's up for discussion. But we cannot not do this project, and the best way that we have to fund it is through the sale of this car park, because that is the way in which the community would see to support the sale of land, which is highly contentious. It's something that we have promised to do, and we need to get on with it. This is not discretionary. And just again, talking about debt, I think that when you look at what, as Councillor Gonchefsky has talked about, the debt that the current council, members of the current council, not all, have considered have been where there's been a positive business case, and there has not been much borrowing happening by this current council. We substantially had to deal with the resource recovery facility at the Mindarie Regional Council, which is the most substantial debt that we've recently taken on over a 10-year period. That is a net positive business case, and that has had substantial impact on our gate fee for delivering waste to the Tamala Park tip, and has been the subject of much discussion. And we're hoping to reap some of that back through the MRC when they consider what to do with the land and the facility, and whether that can be either leased or sold so that we can pay down some of that debt that was accrued as part of that business case. So I don't think this is a council that is ratcheting up debt. I think that this is a council that understands we do have reached a limit where we really need to say we have to pay it down, and there are plans afoot. But to do that by saying we're no longer going to do this project, we're not going to meet our obligation to the Attorney General, to the community, to an adopted plan, that is not rigour. That's all I have to say. Is there any, I think we've all spoken. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken that wishes to? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? Declare that lost, with Councillor Uplow and Councillor Alexander voting in favour. So back to the substantive motion. For those who haven't spoken, are there any further debate? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Alexander voting against. I declare that carried. Next item is 12.1. We jump there. Annual review of council delegations. This is an absolute majority decision. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Loden, seconded by Councillor Iapolo.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to support the officer recommendation.
Councillor Iapolo?
As am I, just with a one amendment, which I can do after everyone else has spoken. I feel like.
Does anyone else wish to speak, or can we go to Councillor Iapolo for the amendment? Back to you, Councillor Iapolo.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so my amendment, this is around the review of council delegations in relation to heritage property. looking to not extend administration's capacity to make decisions for certain developments without coming to council. So respecting and preserving heritage within Vincent is an important stated and agreed objective by the city and the community. City
Apologies,
of Vincent's.
I drifted off there.
Oh,
We just do need a seconder.
sure, sorry.
Seconded by Councillor Hallett. Thank you, Councillor Hallett.
Sorry. Thank you. Respecting and preserving heritage within Vincent is an important stated and agreed objective by the city and the community. City of Vincent's strategic community plan identifies several priorities based on community feedback, which includes sensitive design, where a stated outcome we would work toward is our built form, character and heritage being protected. Moreover, there's comments included in that plan specifically from community members about the valuing heritage and distinguishing architecture of town centres to avoid generic outputs and ensuring planning applications take due consideration. Vincent's own website says that the heritage of Vincent is unique, vibrant, complex and rich in history, stories, people and places. The City of Vincent has over 20 places registered on the State Register of Heritage Places. Not only are these places important to the city's heritage, but their significance has also been recognised at state level, the State Register being compiled and managed by the Heritage Council of WA. Distinguishing whether or not factors contribute to the heritage significance of the heritage place is not straightforward and involves subjective assessment from the Heritage Council of WA, heritage impact statements prepared by external consultants, and reviews of such materials by the city's design review panel, Heritage Architect. Decisions on planning and development applications are quasi-judicial, with several legal authorities and statutes and policies required to be considered. They include the planning and development regulations, the Charter for Places of Cultural Significance, the Borough Charter, State Planning Policy, Community and Stakeholder Engagement Policy, Heritage Management Built Form Policy. Specifically, and this talks to the issue about how subjective the decision that administration is trying to push back to the authority of administration to make without coming to council is the Borough Charter, which reflects the subjective assessment involved and as a result sets a standard of practice for those who provide advice, make decisions about and undertake work to places of cultural significance. I guess in summary, removal of a requirement that unless the structure building does not contribute to the heritage significance of the heritage place, in my view, because it is subjective, weakens the existing process because it removes a key level of oversight over administration's decision-making in an area that is significantly important to the city, the community, the state, our collective heritage, and is therefore not supportive of the principles of good governance, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Apollo. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Look, I support this amendment, mostly just for one reason. I don't question administration's expertise and ability to make those decisions. But I think because of the very fact that heritage listed properties are so scrutinised by the community, that there is a level of transparency around how that decision is made that I think is useful for the community to see, even if the outcome is exactly the same.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question. In the reasons given and in administration's comment, there's reference to whether the particular structures or buildings contributed to the overall heritage significance. And I'm just wondering if we can have some clarification as to who actually makes that determination, because if we are talking about something that's on a heritage register, when that register is completed, there is usually a fairly detailed outline and plan of what elements and structures contribute to the historical significance of the property. And I'm just wondering whether decisions made in this regard were made by administration or by council, what discretion would there actually be for either deciding body to make that determination as to that the structure does or doesn't contribute?
Through you, Mayor Cole, when the property is listed on the heritage list, there is the adoption of the statement of significance.
I don't know if you get any closer to your microphone, if that's possible.
How about now? Can you hear me okay?
Might need a bit, sorry, I think we've got a loud volume in the chamber and soft volume on Zoom. So Wendy, would you mind just turning up the volume a little bit? Sorry.
Turn me up.
It's loud in here and quiet out in Zoom land. Yep, go ahead.
How about now?
Manager. Yeah, that's good, thanks.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole. The statement of significance is adopted when the property is listed on the heritage list. The statement of significance, just to be clear, is basically the summary of the key values that would contribute to the cultural heritage significance of that place. So that is defined and that is specified in terms of what buildings or structures on that particular property have the heritage value. Okay, so that is defined in the statement of significance. So ultimately, if there was a development proposal submitted, then the assessment would be against, well, what is that development relating to? Is it to do with the items on that property with heritage significance, or does it not? And I guess that would ultimately inform, and that's not a subjective decision because ultimately it's specified in the statement of significance. So on that basis, there is no discretion afforded in terms of whether development does or doesn't relate to the items specified in that statement of significance.
Thank you. I think that helps clarify my position. I am absolutely supportive of the intent to bring these kinds of applications that deal with heritage significance to council. However, I don't really think this particular amendment is necessary, given that what we've just heard is that the decision on whether a structural building is one that contributes to the historical significance is not a discretion that is available to council or administration to determine whether it is or it isn't. In that case, what I think we would be dealing with in this situation is administration making a decision only in relation to structures and buildings that have not been identified as contributing to historical significance as determined by the Heritage Council or the governing body in relation to the heritage list. So I don't think it would really change the outcome, but I do agree with Councillor Hallett's comments around the transparency that is needed in relation to very sensitive decisions around heritage. But I don't, in this situation, I don't believe that this particular amendment's necessary.
Yes, go ahead, ask a question.
Manager, just wondering if one of these, in the admin's comment, it says about the planning framework and it has a process in place to deal with these. Does that include informing local community around, for example, a heritage building has a patio that doesn't add to its heritage, and so the applicant wants to get rid of the patio. Is there any informing that the community involved, just in terms of giving the heads up that when you see trucks roll up and stuff happening at a heritage listed property, that it has actually been assessed and prior?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in Council's community and stakeholder engagement policy, it prescribes circumstances when applications or proposals would be advertised in respect to demolition of any structure or building on a heritage place that would not contribute to the significance of that heritage place. Then it does not require or it doesn't commit the city to notifying adjoining residents, as you just set out, Councillor Hallett, and that's prescribed in Council's community and stakeholder engagement policy.
Thank you.
Councillors, I might just ask a question, Manager. I'm just trying to understand the point of the delegation. The issue, is there an issue? Because I think the only one that we've recently had is the church that we discussed either last month or the month before. So I'm just trying to understand what the change in delegation is seeking to solve. It doesn't seem that there's a volume problem here. It's simply that administration thinks this is no longer necessary, or that it's like, for example, in that situation, was the applicant, I know that there can be delays when things come to council, for example. Did the applicant see that as additional problem in terms of trying to deal with that application? Because I just think we do need to just be conscious of timeframes when council's making decisions on what could be seen to be quite straightforward matters.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, the church, the monastery along Vincent Street, that was an item that was presented to council in its March ordinary meeting. And yes, that was a reference point for these for this opportunity to improve and streamline decision-making. Ultimately, the proponents in that circumstance, though there were understanding of council timelines and the need for that item to be determined by council based on delegation, and that was explained by administration. Ultimately, they were looking to move on undertaking the restoration work sooner rather than later. So in that particular instance, yes, it was a barrier to be able to move in a timely manner to address some of the issues on site. And from administration's perspective, in considering this suggested delegation change, it was really around, well, what is the planning framework? What is the processes in place to ensure that we are maintaining a high degree and quality in decision making, and ensuring that all of the steps are still followed? And I suppose on that basis, from our perspective, there is controls that would remain in place, particularly around the statement of significance, and ensuring that it wouldn't ultimately undermine or compromise the heritage significance of the site.
Thank you. Councillors, any further comments or questions? Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just a question in relation to if the wording of this amendment is adopted as written, does that impact the other proposed changes in item 7 of that delegation, or is administration satisfied that there's not necessarily, that's okay in terms of, because I think that the previous way the delegation was written, that it had combined 6 and 7, and now they're split out. So I just want to confirm that we're not creating any issues with requiring a decision to come to council for demolition that then is effectively, and then when you're going to see the subsequent works being approvable by administration under delegation. Is there any comments on that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, my advice is that they are discrete, and I'm satisfied that condition 6 and the suggested wording in terms of an amendment to item 6 to not permit administration to deal with demolition would not have a bearing on the wording, suggested wording of delegation number 7, that they're separate and there is no impact.
Yeah, look, I'm always happy to consider when administration puts forward mechanisms to, I guess, try and streamline things from the perspective of the community, like where we're not trying to have this sort of like strong element of unnecessary regulatory capture or burden on the people that we regulate. However, I am sympathetic to Councillor Arpalo's position, and I guess I sort of feel that this amendment ultimately ensures that at least at the beginning of the process, it's kicked off with a level of transparency, and I feel that we can justify that to the community, even if there is some impact on the timeliness of decision making. That said, I think it is highly unlikely that I will seek to put myself in any sort of technical expert position of heritage or design, etc. And so I very much take the view that it is very likely that all decision making will occur in alignment with the statement of significance. but it will be in a more transparent manner, and I'm sort of okay with that. So yeah, I'm supportive of the amendment.
Councillors, any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? Declare Councillor Castle voting against, and the amendment is carried. We're back to the substantive. Any further comments or questions on the substantive motion? Okay, I'll put the delegations. All those in favour? That's adopted unanimously. Thank you. Next item is 12.3, outcome of advertising for new temporary employment or appointment of the CEO policy. This one was called forward because an absolute majority decision is required. Could I please have a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Hallett, seconded by Councillor Loden.
Happy to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Loden.
Me too.
Councillors, noting no public submissions were received. Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare that adopted. Item 12.6, outcome of advertising amended council members continuing professional development policy. This again was an absolute majority decision is required. Can I please have a mover and seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hallett. Thank you, Councillor Loden. Any comment?
As above.
No comment. Anyone wish to speak to this? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried. The next item is 12.7, advertising of amended policy council member contact with developers. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Hallett, seconded by Councillor Iapolo.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a general comment that this has been kind of an established position and a bit of just a cleanup of the policy. I think it's great that Vincent has had a long-term commitment to transparency around council member contact with developers. That's all.
Councillor Iapolo.
Look, I'm going to propose an amendment to this, but for those at home listening, I guess the existing policy as it stands only requires council members to disclose contact with developers at a time when a development application is submitted. And I think from a governance perspective, I think we can go further than that, and I'll talk to that more specifically with a proposed amendment, but I'll let other councillors speak first.
Councillors, do any council members wish to speak to the substantive motion? Councillor Iapolo, you can put your amendment.
Okay. Amendment is, yeah, thank you. Okay, so everyone has it. It's on the yellow page, 12.7, and it effectively requires, what it's requesting is a change that there's been some hesitation. No, I don't want to talk to it. Someone's got to, yeah, okay. It's.
I do need a seconder for the amendment. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Loden.
Okay. So as I was saying, for the people at home, at the moment, the existing policy says that we only need to, councillors only need to disclose contact with property developers when a development application is put forward. What I'm trying to do is increase our governance in this space by requiring a register be recorded prior to that time. The purpose of requiring a policy to record council member contact with the developers is to ensure that all discussions and contact with developers is transparent, so as to discourage solicitation by developers to procure favourable support for a future outcome in exchange for any consideration receivable to the elected member. If this type of behaviour were to occur, it is just as probable that it would occur prior to lodgement of any development application than afterward. The specification that the register be maintained confidentially, which is what I'm proposing here, but still observable to all elected members, is to respect the commercial in confidence requirements of developers for potential developments that may not be disclosed in public at the time of such discussion. And that's why I'm proposing an amendment that kind of talks about a register that could be seen at least by the collective council prior to a development application actually being filed. Thank you.
Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I support the intent. I'm just trying to get my head around the amendment, and so I guess a question through to administration is, what is this going to change in our process now? If this amendment is agreed, what will be the change that Councillor Loden will see? We'll still be making disclosures prior or after an application is received, but the disclosures prior will be confidential, whereas in the current process we don't need to do it before. Is that, have I interpreted that correctly? That's what I think Councillor Arpolo is saying, and I just wanted to get that feedback from administration.
Through the chair, the current administration recommendation would require the council members to keep their own records in respect to contact with developers prior to the submission of a DA, and that when a DA is presented, then they would then submit all that prior contact. So there is no requirement for them to declare it beforehand, but at the point of DA they would need to, and then that contact would be entered onto the existing register and public register. The current motion as it is would require council members, the amendment as it is would require council members to declare them as they occur, and they go on to this confidential register, and then at some point, should a DA occur, some of those declarations would flow on through to the public register.
Thank you. So in some ways, wouldn't this make it a bit easier for council members to then be able to say, like some DAs take a long time. There's probably DAs that I've talked to people about 4 years or 5 years ago that might then all of a sudden appear in a council agenda, and then I forget and then go, oh, actually, no, I talked to that guy 5 years ago about his development application, versus if I could have submitted that at the time, it's held on a register, and then basically when it pops up, it's declared for me. Would that not make it a bit easier?
Potentially. Administration's view was and continues to be that the city would be happy to provide councillors some form of log that they could keep themselves, because they do have to record or keep records in respect to certain meetings that they do have, and that that log would assist them in when the DA comes, that they would just submit those. So it's really about where that administrative burden lies and at what point.
So I'm supportive of the proposal that puts the administrative burden on the administration. And so I'm supportive of this amendment.
Councillors? Councillor Hallett?
Just a question for admin about, because I won't direct it towards Councillor Arpolo. It's seeking for a confidential register. What's admin's position, although I know you don't support it anyway, around that being a public register, similar to, public ministerial diaries and that kind of stuff?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I might just comment that if there's any benefit to the current policy in having a public register, is that there is some transparency, and there may be some weight given to that by developers, that they know that there's a policy and their contact with elected members will be recorded and it'll be made publicly available. So I don't see a huge benefit in having a confidential register, and it'd be against the intent of all our other registers, which are public and transparent.
Yeah, sorry, it's a question. I mean, technically, isn't all of our interactions with developers pre-lodgement? I mean, it's not confidential, but it's stored in our own records somewhere that, so aren't you effectively with the same? It's just a question of who's holding the information, the council members or the administration?
That's a very good question. I think, can I just layer that? Because I know that as mayor, every email and every appointment is logged in Content Manager, but I'm not sure whether that's the case for council members. So all of my emails and meetings are logged and can be looked up by pretty much anyone in the organisation and FOI'd, etc. I think that's slightly different to council members.
Through Mayor Cole, I think if the elected member is using their City of Vincent email and using the City of Vincent calendar, then it will actually be captured in our record system in some way.
That's good to know. Thank you. Sorry, did that answer your question, or did I sort of divert that accidentally?
There might have been a slight diversion there. I mean, so maybe as an example, developer rings me up and says, "Hey, Dan, come down, check out my development. I want to have a chat to you." I say, "Oh yeah, sure. I'm free on Tuesday. Go and have a chat to him." That doesn't exist in the council email system, in a calendar, in a diary, anywhere. And then I forget about that conversation. And then 3 years later, that comes back and it turns out that we've had an extensive conversation about different things and, that what was discussed, and then that comes up in the application somehow and I'm conflicted on that. So having that information all disclosed somewhere, and that when that then comes to the fore, that's all documented there, would be very useful, I think. But actually documented at the time that you had the conversation, rather than trying to recall what was said on a previous conversation.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we did mention in the response to the proposed amendment that engagement and communication with the developer does not in and of itself create a conflict, and the system in place for local government is for councillors to declare conflicts before an item is presented to council. As they're presented to council, there's nothing untoward to a council member meeting with a developer or a member of the development industry, given there are large numbers of them in our community. So I want to separate the aspect of conflicts of interest, which are required to be declared, from this register, which is a transparency mechanism.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I ask a question? It relates to the sort of, I guess, that distinction of pre and post element to this amendment and to the requirement at all. There's mention of prior to the lodgement of a development application. As a council member, I'm not aware of when a development application is actually lodged. So I'm not able to make that distinction between prior and post. It's quite often, if it's a large development application, we'll become aware after the lodgement that there is consultation happening or discussions or sometimes meetings with the applicant. But I guess I'm looking for some clarity around what is considered pre and prior, and to add to that, the further question around when they come to the JDAP versus to council. As a non-JDAP member, I'm also not aware of the applications that are being presented to JDAP. So I'm just, whether we go with this amendment or not, I'm just looking for some clarity on how, as a council member, I determine that prior and post trigger.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the main mechanism for identifying pre would be in the monthly council agenda reports. We do have a list of the items going to the design review panel, which could be anywhere between several months to a year or two before actual lodgement of a DEA. So the applications being reviewed at the design review panel do provide a good lead into applications that may be lodged.
So it's a guide, but it's not definitive. And it also doesn't tell me when the application's actually being lodged. It might put me on alert that it's coming up. So I don't really have an answer to that, because I think I'm nervous about putting my hand in the air for something that I will find difficult to identify what my requirements are. And I think that it would be better to have some clarity around when, if, for example, this amendment was to be passed, when does that confidential register become public? Because I don't think that's really clear from what we're talking about yet.
Can I just further to that before I come to you, Councillor Hallett? I think it is a very important point that you raised, Councillor Cuzzle. I've only just kind of understanding what you're saying, because when you look at E, which is the new clause inserted by administration, it talks to where contact occurs prior to the lodgement of a development application. The council member shall record all contact privately and disclose the contact as an interest at the point that the application is presented to council, whereas the amendment talks about prior to lodgement of a development application. So that is quite different, because one's talking about applications that are before council and we're making declarations of interest in the chamber at the decision-making time, and one's talking about prior to lodgement of an application, and that could be to the DRP, to the JDAP, to council, potentially even to administration. So that is an important question. CEO or manager?
Through your Mayor Cole, yes, it would be very difficult for an elected member to know, unless they're tracking every single DA we advertise on our website throughout the city of Vincent. It might be very hard for an elected member to know if and when administration is dealing with a proponent on at the pre-lodgement stage of a development application, and even when the application is received and it goes out for public comment, because it could be quite a routine issue. So there would be there is some issues around awareness of council members for the vast majority of development applications which don't go to council.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I just might add, the process has always been that if the council member's in doubt about whether an application has been lodged or not, that they would contact administration to advise that they've been contacted by a developer and to ask whether or not the application's been lodged. The fact is that the status of an application changes moment to moment. Lodgement occurs, can occur at any time. So it'd be a matter of contacting administration. And this is historically what's happened, to confirm whether or not the application was lodged prior to or during that contact, and to err on the side of caution and to register contact, even if the application was lodged the next day. It's quite often that the council members have still registered that contact.
Aren't all these questions directed at some confusion with the existing policy, not with what I'm proposing? I mean, if people don't understand the existing policy, we've got a problem, because I'm trying to strengthen it.
That's not a question. And I'm actually,
my question is,
the question is actually about the interaction between the existing policy and the amendment.
but it's the questions. My question is, isn't that question, these questions that have been asked, is saying about they don't know when the DA is lodged, which is part of the existing policy.
Which section of the existing policy?
existing policy says that you only have to disclose regarding contact with property developers when a development application is lodged. And all these questions seem to be...
I'm reading a section that says disclose the contact as an interest at the point that the application is presented to council.
That's the existing policy.
That's the amendment by administration in the existing policy. So that's hence my question. Councillor Hallett.
I do have a question on the amendment. Does administration think it would be easier rather than having two registers if there was just one single public register for any developer contact?
A tricky question to answer because I'm trying to put multiple hats on. For clarity purpose, yes, administratively it would be, although whether contact with someone who's thinking about a development and the implications of commercial confidentiality, that they're still going through an amount of consideration about whether that development is commercially viable or not, and whether that's commercially in confidence and the like, and having that registered publicly may be an issue for them.
Through you, Michael, I could probably just answer that. Our preference would be to have a single register and for it to be public, and the responsibility remains with the elected member to decide if and when they record a contact on that register. Again, similar to conflicts of interest, erring on the side of caution. If there's any doubt, then there's no downside that I could see to registering that contact on the public register.
Can I just talk about, the reality of when someone, I just think that developers will sometimes come to talk to council members to sort of test something. And it might be to say, we actually like to do something that's vastly outside of your scheme, or that we want to, try to do something. And a lot of that, the initial contact is about sort of testing community sentiment and our planning framework. And if every contact on a project that's not yet financially viable or potentially going ahead is declared on a register, it would potentially prevent that developer from wanting to come and have that initial contact with the council. And most of the contact that I have, which is actually very little with developers, is them coming to me with proposals and sort of checking, sentiment checking it with the community. And have been able to really push back on some things that they have wanted to do or to test or to put forward or to try to get some better community benefit. But I've had that opportunity because they're coming to have that very preliminary discussion with you. And my concern would be that if you declare every single contact on a public register before a proposal is developed and at a point that they want to lodge an application, that contact just won't happen, and that opportunity to actually reinforce our planning framework, talk about issues that would be highly unlikely to be supported by the community would be potentially lost. So I'm quite happy to meet the intent of this. And Councillor Apollo, you put this at a workshop and I said, yes, very happy to do that, because I think administratively, as soon as someone contacts you, if you're dealing with it then and there, it's easy. It means there's less chance of forgetting it. I've got no problem in sharing it with all of you, because predominantly the contact is developers coming and saying, can we meet with the whole council? It's very little, very few examples where they're actually just seeking to come and meet with me. Sometimes it's because I'm here during the week and other council members can't attend, or it's, at short notice. Always with a planning officer present. That is my number one principle. Jane Naidoo will always be contacted to attend a meeting with me, always, whether it's a council item, whether it's a JDAP item, whether it's or it will be David, the CEO, always have an officer present. And I'm very happy to record it and lodge it somewhere so that you can have that on a register. But I think we probably just need to maybe talk about prior to consideration rather than lodgement, because I think that word is just potentially, because you know, when you have these transparency measures, you want to make sure that they're administratively possible, that we're not trying to trip ourselves up by falling short of something because we're not aware of when something was lodged. But in terms of the actual practical application of this, of writing on a piece of paper, this person came and met with me, not a problem. You won't hear from me that often. It doesn't happen very often. So many of our applications go through to the JDAP. That's really where the action is happening these days. And JDAP members have got their own requirements around how they then need to deal with that. So if a developer actually comes to me and wants to talk to me about a development before it goes to the JDAP, where I'm not a decision maker, I see this as an opportunity to engage with them, to try to get them to meet our planning framework, to get community benefit, to get something positive from that discussion. And if you say every single contact has to be made early before lodgement, I think that that opportunity could be lost. So I don't think every single contact should be on a public register straight away. I think that the point at which the decision making happens is absolutely paramount. And if there is any favour or poor conduct happening, it's at the point that the decision's made, that's where it really needs to be stipulated. That's where the benefit comes. But predominantly, it's group emails for council matters. It's, I'm going to meet with this person with a member of the planning team who would like to come and join me. And it's JDAP matters where I'm not a decision maker, but I'm very happy to either invite you all or to disclose the contact. But we need to understand that it is a normal part of our role to have discussions with developers. And if we're doing that with transparency, by having officers present, by inviting you to come to the meeting, by ensuring that it's declared at the time a decision's made, whether it's by council or at the JDAP, that is meeting our obligations. This developer contact was groundbreaking at the time that we did this, and I think it's a fantastic thing. And I think the administration of it, to simply put it on a piece of paper as soon as it happens, would be very beneficial. I think the issue for me is just the use of the word lodgement, because I think there is a grey area about trying to keep up with that on top of everything else that we have to do as council members, to actually then try to remember to look at applications that have been lodged and where they're at the advertising period. Once you've read your council agendas and your workshop agendas and every other things and your emails and you're responding to residents, we just need to make sure it's workable. Does anyone wish to speak to it who hasn't already?
I do.
Yes.
I think that this, I don't have an issue with the wording of this amendment. I thank Councillor Hallett and Councillor Castle for exploring the idea of having a completely public register that's public from day dot, but I do accept Mayor Cole's commentary in relation to the importance of those pre-lodgement discussions. However, I do feel that this is adequately captured in this amendment. Councillor Iopolo has said in this amendment that their pre-lodgement register will be confidential, and then there'll be the post-lodgement register. I feel, and as Mayor Cole has said, this is not something that happens frequently, and generally when it does happen, everybody knows about it anyway, because it's something big, like Fitzgerald Street or something. But I feel that if we're talking about the example Councillor Loden gave, and a developer contacted him to talk about a planning or development proposal in the City of Vincent, he could ask that person, have you put in an application? And if they said, well, actually, he probably could ask Jay, who'd be accompanying him to the meeting. But, if Jay wasn't available, he could say, did you put an application? Have you got an application that has been lodged? And that council member then would be able to access the information and know which register to put it on. Would it be the confidential register, or would it be the public register? I think I'd be, this is about taking this out to community consultation, and I think I'd be happy to put this out as worded for community consultation. I do note administration not wanting to maintain two registers, a confidential register. But I feel that there's a loss that could come from having everything public all at once, and that the administrative burden that may result in having to maintain 2 registers is probably worth it, and shouldn't be that great because it doesn't happen that often anyway. So yeah, look, I'm supportive of this, and I think we can take it out to consultation and then we can see what comes back and think more about the logistics of implementation over that time.
Good points, thank you. Councillor Castle.
Can I ask a question? I apologise for going through this. We're trying to understand this wording on the fly, and I don't believe, I think I must have been on leave for the workshop where this was discussed before. So I am trying to get my head around it squarely. I'm sort of working myself in circles, but again, I'm coming back to the words prior to the lodgement of a development application. Would it be correct that the application of this amendment is that council members would submit their contact to administration? That contact would be kept confidential until such time as the development application is lodged, at which time it would go on the public register. So it would be administration actually making the determination that this is the trigger, and therefore they would then turn that disclosure from a confidential to a public one.
Through you, Mayor Cole, with the added complication is that one developer might have more than one project. So in Councillor Loden's example of a conversation 3 years ago, we would need to have a mechanism to identify which conversation about which issue related to which DA.
I guess my follow-up to that answer would be, would it not be correct that the contact relates to the particular developer at the particular property, regardless of whether they've changed their mind about what they're going to do? You have had a contact with that developer around that property. So it wouldn't matter if there was multiple projects.
Councillors, I feel we can see our way forward here. Do you think we can move forward with this? With any further comments? This is an amendment, you don't get to. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to put the amendment. All those in favour? All those, yep, you've got unanimous support there, Councillor Apollo. We got there. I think, look, I understand it took a bit of time, but this came to us today and we're just trying to unpack the administrative obligation, but I think this works. So thank you very much for bringing it forward. We're back to the substantive motion. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Okay, the last item for this evening is 12.10, report and minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 3rd of May 2022. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Preferably from the Audit Committee. Moved by Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded by Councillor Alexander. Any comments, Councillor Gontaszewski?
I believe administration is recommending that there's an amendment to the recommendation. I'm having docs on tap issues, so if it could be brought up on the screen, that would be very useful for me.
That would be great. If that's possible, please, Wendy. Is it gone?
The recommendation, while Wendy's trying to type it up, is simply changing the recommendation from council receiving the minutes of the Audit Committee of the 3rd of May 2022 as at attachment 1, and instead of notes the recommendations, it is endorses the recommendations.
So simply changing the word notes to endorses. Is that correct? Just that one word? It has been moved and seconded. So Councillor Gontaszewski, are you happy to support an amendment to change the word notes to endorses?
Yes, I guess as long as council, I mean, I am because I was there and I've been part of it, but it's just as long as council members that weren't there and weren't part of it potentially understand.
Well, we're just changing the wording.
Yeah,
We haven't actually,
that's
we're not
fine.
actually voting on the adoption of it. I know that seems really counterintuitive, but and seconded by the amendment, seconded by Councillor Apollo. Okay, I'll put the amendment first. All those in favour? I can't see
Yes.
Councillor Alexander, but I assume you're voting with us. Yes, thank you. That's passed. We're back to the substantive. Any further discussion on the audit minutes? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? And declare the motion carried. Okay, so we have already dealt with our confidential item 17.1 on block, so that means there's no further business to be dealt with this evening. So I'd like to thank you all for attending and for those who have joined us online, and declare the meeting closed at 8:01 p.m. Thank you.